As Venezuela enters a new phase of turmoil, questions about leadership and legality are coming into sharp focus. Opposition figure Maria Corina Machado, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate who remains in hiding after the disputed 2024 presidential election, is a voice for democratic change. However, she is being excluded from the current transition plan. Here at home, many legal experts are critical of the U.S. military action that led to Maduro's capture and his federal arraignment in Manhattan on drug trafficking and related charges. The unprecedented case is a departure from traditional international law and executive authority. We're also watching how these events intersect with questions about the legal status of Venezuelans living in the U.S., including visa policy, immigration status, and what federal court rulings might mean for families right here in South Florida. From the legal status of Venezuelan immigrants here to the federal case unfolding with Maduro, we are joined by legal experts Tara Newsom, attorney and legal professor, and also immigration attorney Paul Palacios with Migrants Foundation, Inc. Thank you so much for joining us. Tara, I'd like to start with you. As we speak, the U.S. Senate has just voted on the War Powers Act resolution, 52-47, with 5 Republicans breaking ranks and voting in favor of this. Of course, it does have to go to another vote in order for final passage. Why is this relevant, and how do you see this affecting the questions about the legality of this extraction?
I think this goes to the framework of how we should be viewing all of this, and that's through the lens of the United States Constitution. And so the 7 articles of the United States Constitution grant the powers, right? The Article 1 is to the legislative branch that has the power to declare war, engage in war. They also have the power of the purse. In the 1970s, they gave themselves the War Powers Act, which allows them to check the president's Article 2 power to be commander-in-chief and the chief head of state and all of that. So what we're seeing in real time is Congress actually responding to the president's, mighty power of trying to have this inherent power that isn't actually constitutional law. It's sort of an interpretation of it, to utilize the executive power to go into a country and what looked like a real conflict between whether it's an extraction to bring back for indictment, or is it a regime change? And so we're seeing Congress really giving a report card to the sitting president. Hey, we don't necessarily buy that this is just trying to take Maduro out, bring him back to make sure that we can indict him and have federal law. It really looks like they're listening to the rhetoric that he's posting and saying in real time that he wants a regime change. And that's the job of Congress, to check the president. But you've really got to look through this through the lens of both international law and domestic law. From an international perspective, this has only been precedented a few times, especially from the United States. International law really dictates that a regime change cannot happen unless 3 things happen. You can't interfere with a country's sovereignty unless, number 1, the country invites you to, number 2, it's self-defense, or number 3, you have the United Nations Security Council give you permission. None of that existed here.
What about domestically?
Domestically, the DEA, the FBI have all been empowered by Congress to go ahead and support arrest warrants and indictments, and to use military support to do so. But this is where the conflict really is at, and why it's so important that Congress is speaking right now. And that's because you have our Secretary of State Rubio saying this is just an execution of a domestic law to extract and bring to justice here in the courts, just like we did with the Panama President Manuel Noriega in 1989. And then you have the president and his other top advisors saying, no, this is a regime change. We're going to control Venezuela. And so the courts are really going to have to unwind what is the predominant purpose from this administration. Is the predominant purpose to execute a lawful extradition, or is it a regime change? And I think the report card right now is saying they don't believe the president.
Well, let's pivot to the federal drug trafficking case, right? That Maduro has already pleaded not guilty, as did his wife, Celia Flores. Legally speaking, is he going to be tried as an American? How does this work?
Well, part of our domestic law is somewhat international. He could, and he is, offering that he is the head of state. He is the lawful head of state of Venezuela. And so that would offer him the head of state of immunity. Of course, that requires him to have recognized from the United States as the head of state. And in August of last year, the United States Secretary of State did not recognize him, recognized his opposition, Edmundo Gonzalez, and so that doesn't look like it's going to be very weighty. But what he will now be is under the jurisdiction of the federal courts. And what we saw is that he pled not guilty, but when he did that, he also said, I am the head of Venezuela, and I am the first lady, said his wife. All the narrative of trying to execute that defense of being head of state.
There are so many Venezuelans who live in the Tampa Bay area, who live in the state of Florida, who are concerned about their immigration status. There are visas, there are paroles. We've talked about the temporary protected status. What happens to them?
Well, so far, none of that has changed. The parole for Venezuelans program, along with the Cubans, Nicaraguans, and Haitians, that was eliminated by the Trump administration, and that's not it's not affected by this process. What would be affected, perhaps, is the asylum applicants, Venezuelan asylum applicants in the U.S. People are claiming, well, we took out Maduro, now you can go back to your country, and that is just not the case. Because, as I said, we have left the same regime in power. So people who have been persecuted by the Maduro regime will be persecuted by the Delcy Rodriguez regime, by the Diosdado Cabello regime, and by the Vladimir Padrino regime even more. Because now there has been a military action against Venezuela, and anybody that they deem a traitor to the country will be arrested, perhaps persecuted and tortured.
So for the folks who are watching this and aren't really sure, not familiar with the temporary protected status that was eliminated by the Trump administration for Venezuelans, can you describe the impact of that change?
Well, the temporary protected status was extended in the waning days of the Biden administration. The Trump administration came in and vacated that extension instead of following the statute as it should be to wind down the temporary protected status, but because they would have had to waited the 16 months or the 18 months that they would be in process. So that litigation is still ongoing. The order putting back the temporary protected status for Venezuelans has been stayed, though. So right now, nobody has temporary protected status, and it won't be approved for extension. It is possible that the court may rule in favor of the Venezuelan, but by that time, the temporary protected status would have expired anyway.
As an immigration attorney, as a fellow Venezuelan, what advice are you giving Venezuelans who are calling your office for information, for legal advice?
Well, for legal advice, if they are petitioning for asylum, if they have not petitioned for asylum, and they are concerned and they can petition for asylum, they should do so. And they should seek legal advice, because it is possible that the government in their asylum proceedings might seek to dismiss their asylum proceedings, saying, well, we took out Maduro, so now you can go back to your country. But we have to show them that, in effect, that has no effect. In reality, fear of future persecution is higher now than it was before. Now that the American government has taken action against Venezuela, and their Maduro regime is still in power.